Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. Apologies for how I look. I am extremely exhausted. Post-concussion syndrome is definitely kicking my butt, but here I am, coffee in hand, and we're going to be discussing this week's true crime recap, roundup, whatever you want to call it. So first on the docket is Irina Garcia. If nobody has heard about this case, you need to look into it. So Irina Garcia was stabbed to death by her son, and she was sleeping next to her newborn child. So her son is 13 years old, and he has been arrested for stabbing her to death. Irina was only 39 years old, and this happened in Hialeah, Florida. Basically what happened is that on Thursday at around 11:30 p.m., Derek Rosa, who is the minor that's charged in connection to killing his mother, called 911 and said that he had just murdered his mother, which, I mean, it's nice that he admitted that, but still. So cops came, obviously sequestered him, found Irina, and his 14-day-old sister was unharmed, inches away from where their mother was. It's thought that Derek waited until his mother was asleep, and then he stabbed her multiple times in the neck. That's how they believe he killed her. At this moment, he is still in custody, of course, and his half-sister, so the 14-day-old infant, her father was away in Georgia on business, work stuff at the time, so that's why he wasn't at the scene or anything like that. Apparently, from the officers, it wasn't what you would expect walking into that scene. Obviously, it's very heartbreaking. To have a son kill his own mother with unknown causes as to why he just kind of snapped is very, very bizarre. Very bizarre. Also, everything I talk about, I will have links in my description box down below, also with them subcategorized. Even if there's just one article in regards to the case that I'm discussing, it will still be down there. So back on October 16th, there was an Amber Alert issued for Kylie Horne and Kylann Harper. Kylann is Kylann. Kylie is 11 and Kylann is 4. They were seen just prior to noon this past Sunday, so on the 15th. This Amber Alert was issued in Georgia as they were abducted from a Burger King on the 15th. And like I mentioned the last time they were seen was prior to noon on Sunday, which is around 11:50 a.m. and Veterans Parkway in Columbus, Ohio. So these two girls were believed to be in extreme danger and last seen in a Honda CR-V with the Georgia tag TGS7835. The person that was driving the car or in the car is Michaela Harrell. They don't know if they're connected to one another or not. As an update, they were found safe, which is great. But still, Amber Alerts are something that we should still make note of. Hence why I am still keeping it in this true crime roundup. The next thing we're going to discuss, my friends, is the big bombshell that happened this week. And I briefly discussed it last week in my true crime recap. So, like I mentioned last week, Joran van der Sloot, or just a few days ago actually, Joran van der Sloot pled guilty to extortion and wire fraud. And in exchange for that, he had to admit what happened to Natalee Holloway. And he admitted that the day that she went missing, she deflected his sexual advances. He got pissed and he bashed her head in with a cinder block and threw her body into the water. It was part of the plea deal that he had to explain how she died. Just to backtrack a little bit, he was found guilty for wire fraud and extortion against Natalee Holloway's family. And he extorted or tried to extort $225,000 from her family in connection to what happened. And he basically blew smoke up their ass every time they would ask what happened to Natalee. And he wouldn't tell them. So These charges date back to June 30th of 2010, which is also around the same time in which he killed Stephanie Flores Ramirez, of who he will be extradited back to Peru, where he will continue to serve his 28-year sentence. So it's a huge step for everybody that's connected to this case, that something actually was done and that we figured out exactly how Natalee died. I mean, it's been 18 years since she died. 18 and a half, almost 18 and a half years. It's about time that we figured out exactly what happened to her and that he admitted his guilt when it comes to her death. Because for the longest time, he refused to say anything in regards to Natalee Holloway's death, or he would just deflect it, which really irritates me. But at the same time, I get it. He didn't want to put all the blame on himself. He wanted to deflect the blame and put it on other people. But next, we're going to be discussing the lovely missing teacher from Indiana that her body was found in Puerto Rico while they were searching for her. So on October 16th, so Monday, missing teacher Amanda Lynn Webster, who's 44, she was a teacher an art teacher at Thompson Crossing Elementary School in Indianapolis. She was actually reported missing on Wednesday because she wasn't at her Airbnb, and the landlord for the Airbnb, said that she failed to leave the home with the agreed upon day when she was supposed to leave, and that all of her belongings and a rental car were still there. So that's what prompted, hey, something's wrong. It wouldn't be until Saturday when the police would find her remains. The last person, well, not technically the last person, but apparently it's called an Ashanti alert, which is something that the police commissioner activated and asked people to help search for her. And she was last seen at the Casa Parcha guest house, which is near El Yunque National Park in Naguabo. So they were searching the area, and unfortunately they came across a set of lifeless remains in the river, which is in the neighborhood of Rio Blanco, which is in the Camino Viejo sector of Naguabo. So she was found face down in a rocky area of the river, and police are trying to piece by piece put together what happened to her, but at this time they don't know. Something happened to her when she was walking in this area. Did she lose consciousness and fall? Did she accidentally drown? Did somebody murder her? All of the above. At this time, we don't really know. All we do know is that from what people have said about her is that she's very unique. She's very happy. She had a radiant personality, and everybody is devastated about her loss. 10 out of 10 don't recommend a concussion at all, just so you are aware. Well, the next few cases we're going to be discussing is all about cold cases with an identification. So, Teresa Lee Scalf was found dead in her home in Lakeland, Florida, back on October 27th of 1986, almost 37 years ago. She was found with her neck cut savagely, had extensive defensive wounds. Thankfully, her 8-year-old son was not home at the time of this murder. It was indicated that this was sexually motivated due to different significant characteristics of the crime scene. So during initial analysis, they didn't find any obvious suspects. Obviously, since then, DNA has been a really big thing when it comes to the crime world. So what they did is that blood evidence that didn't come from Scalf, what they did was they submitted it to the combined DNA index system, where it would be cataloged and stored. And with this being in storage, they would then be able to pull it out in the future and use forensic genetics in order to discover who in fact killed her. So with this, they ended up narrowing down exactly who this was that killed her. They figured out that it was Donald Douglas. Donald Douglas was living literally behind where Teresa Scalf was living at the time of her murder. He was interviewed in 1986 during a routine canvass, but there was nothing at the time that linked him to the murder. He had no criminal history at the time, so his DNA wasn't in the system, so they wouldn't be able to connect him to it. But what ended up doing it is that one of his sons' DNA was obtained, and then they analyzed it to see if there was a common genome, and there was. That profile was 100% parent-child relationship. Unfortunately, this lovely man died back in 2008 at the age of 54, so he will never be tried for the death of Teresa Scalf, but we know exactly who killed her now, which is great. Back in 1983, Noelle Russo was brutally murdered with a piece of lumber. She was beaten to death with a piece of lumber. Her body would be found behind the real estate building that sat at the intersections of Petaluma Hill Road and East Cotati Ave, and she was found by a 7-year-old, which is unfortunate, and she had been dead for quite a few days. The last time she was seen alive was by a friend, and this was after Noelle went to her friend's house, on June 24th of 1983, and she showed up because she had a fight with her boyfriend. Well, this friend brought her to the bus stop in order for Noelle to go back home to Rohnert Park, but she was never seen again, and it's believed that she was intercepted by her assailant before she got on the bus. Well, as of this year, her assailant has been identified. Thankfully, with forensic technology and the advancements, they determined that Alfredo Carretero Jr. was the one that did indeed kill her back in 1983. Now, he is an elderly man. He's very old at this point. It's sad that now, at age 65, he now was arrested in connection to this cold case, but I'm happy that we finally have answers when it comes to the murder of Noelle Russo. That's prevalent here this week is Herbert Baumeister. If you guys have not been following along for a little while, then you wouldn't know that I covered Herbert Baumeister, or the I-70 killer, a little while ago, and he's an interesting fella. The reason I say that is because, so let's kind of talk about it a little bit. So one of Herbert Baumeister's victims was identified, that of Allen Livingston, who went missing in 1993 at the age of 27. So he was presumed to be one of the victims, but was formally identified and publicly identified this week. This is the 9th positively identified presumed victim of Herbert Baumeister. And the remains of Livingston were found at Fox Hollow Farm Estate, which is where Herbert Baumeister lived and owned this estate. So, back in 1996, this is when the police searched this estate and they found remains. Unfortunately, this is the same year that Herbert Baumeister went to Canada. He fled to Canada, and he took his own life in a park by a single gunshot wound to the head. Currently, they are testing all the fragments of bones that they found back in 1996 when they searched Fox Hollow Farm. And originally they thought there was 11 DNA profiles, so they were able to identify 8, now 9 of those 11. But now it's believed that this could rise up to 25 different DNA types. So now they have to try and identify any of these with there's a specific new type of testing that they've been using that is available for bone fragments. There was over 10,000 bone fragments found on Fox Hollow Farm Estate, and out of all of the DNA types, there's 3 that they haven't been able to identify because there's no match in the system. So the original 11 was actually 12, but now it could be up to 25. So out of those 12, they've identified 9, and they're still working on identifying the other 3. And I'll put a link to the Herbert Baumeister video that I did along underneath the links I have for this identification of Allen Livingston. There's been a lot of identifications this week. So this one we're going to be discussing, that is the Santa Cruz John Doe back from 1982. After 41 years, this was finally identified as that of Rodney Allen Rumsey, and he was from Woodland, California. So back in October of 1982, a person that was hiking found a body in Moore Creek Outlet, which is in the Natural Bridges State Park in Santa Cruz, California. then the body was on an embankment. So initially, examination of the body, they determined it was homicide. This was determined to be that of a Caucasian male that was around 150 pounds and between the size of 5'6" and 5'8". He also had very distinguishable tattoos. One was a skull that has feathers coming out of its head with, it looks like it would be braids with some type of like metal clip on both sides, that in the eye sockets and the tip of the 3 feathers that it has on its head are red color and the rest is a black ink. The other one is a rose with 3 green leaves. They tried to use this as a way to identify this person, but it didn't. There was no leads that came from this. So this case would be entered into NamUs years later as UP3060. Again, they hoped that his tattoos would help identify him, but nothing came of it. So because of it being a cold case for years, the CDOJ, or the California Department of Justice, ended up collaborating with Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office, and they submitted any forensic evidence from this case to Alanm. And any costs of processing this case were then provided by Roads to Justice, which this is a program I talked about before, where they end up trying to help cold cases and they try to solve them and they try to fund them. So with evidence for Alanm, they ended up creating a DNA profile, and they were able to sequence this to figure out that this was Rodney Allen Rumsey after reaching out to potentially family members. We have no idea a lot about his life. We do know that he was born on May 25th of 1954, but anything surrounding his death, we have no idea about. So this case is still being investigated at this time, and hopefully we learn more. So more on identifying people. Next, we are going to talk about the Mesa County Coroner's Office and how they identified another set of remains. So this one actually is brand new. It just came out 7 hours ago. So back in October of 2011, there was a group of students with their instructor that they attended a class at Colorado Mesa University, and they discovered a skull. This skull was near a plateau. I'm not going to say the name of the plateau because I'm probably going to mess it up. In a deserted area, wilderness area in Mesa County. So these students all were under an environmental science major, and they were doing a fire management field project on this plateau. Now, this plateau is a few hundred yards away from Divide Road, which is near Whitewater, Colorado. So the sheriff's office was able to determine that this skull belonged to a male, an adult male. Other than that, they had no idea because it was only the skull. They didn't know what he weighed, his height, any appearance, nothing. It was just a skull. Had no idea how he died or anything. And this case has really stuck to obviously the Mesa County Sheriff's Office, because they continued to pursue this. They wanted to figure out who this was. They had forensic anthropologists determined that this skull wasn't related to any missing persons cases in the county. In 2011, the CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, did DNA testing on it, and they were able to produce an STR profile, but there was no match because what they did is they took the STR profile and they tested it with DNA that's already in the law enforcement database. A lot of the DNA that's in the database is people that are offenders and not people that aren't offenders. Yes. I mean, there could have been a close family match, so it would potentially identify a close family match, but nothing like that popped up. So back in 2020, with the help of NamUs, which they also entered, his case was entered into NamUs, which was UP64014, they tried their best to identify him, but it went cold again. That was until September 2020 when the Mesa County Coroner's Office teamed with Alanm. They then were able to use advanced DNA testing to identify this man or find a close relative. So it says skeletal remains were sent to Alanm, but that I've found, it was only a skull that was found. So this kind of like boggles my brain unless they don't want to allude to anything else that could be kept under wraps with this case. So what happened is Alanm did their thing, as they always do, and they ended up finding out that this person was Michael John Alonzi, who was born back on December 10th of 1961. They have no idea how he died. Everything is completely unclear, and this investigation is still pending. So if you or anyone you know has any information when it comes to the death of Michael Alonzi, please contact the Mesa County Coroner's Office by calling this number, 970-244-1898, and using the reference case number as C19-787. You know, when somebody typically talks about a cold case, you don't think one will happen 50 years ago and finally be identified. Well, that is exactly what happened this week. So, 50 years ago, in June of 1973, at around 11:20 a.m., there was an unidentified female that was discovered in San Diego Bay, which is between the U.S. Coast Guard Station and Laurel Street, and she was found by a fisherman. This woman's body was in several plastic bags and an orange suitcase. Yes, you could probably guess she was dismembered. They determined that this person died via homicide, as I would probably expect because she's been dismembered, and her case was entered into NamUs as UP 58950. So back in 2020, she was exhumed, and they were trying to identify her via DNA. What they did is with the financial assistance from NamUs, they used a portion of her remains, and they were sent to Alanm. So I bet you're probably wondering why it took 3 years. So because she died 50 years ago, obviously, remains in ground, things decay, things deteriorate. They had to work their way to rebuild her sequence. They had to work their way to be able to identify her. And finally, they were successful. It was identified as that of Arminda Rodriguez de Silva Ribeiro. She was born back on September 16th of 1943 in Portugal. So she immigrated from Portugal to Newark, New Jersey. I said Newark. If I said New York, it's Newark. To Newark, New Jersey after she got married and she had her 2 children. And in Newark, there's a giant Portuguese community. So after investigators started speaking to people that knew of Ribeiro, they learned that she was working for a trailer fabrication company back in 1973. But they don't know why she was in San Diego or what the connection is between the two. So people in Newark still know of her, the people in that community, which is really cool. But police are trying to identify the exact company she worked for in Newark and trying to figure out exactly how she had a connection to San Diego. So if anybody that's watching this has any information regarding the murder of Arminda Rodriguez de Silva Ribeiro, please contact the Homicide Unit at 619-513, let me try that again, at 619-531-2293, or Crime Stoppers at 888-580-8477. The last thing we're going to discuss for this week's crime recap roundup is that there's 3 John or Jane Doe cases that finally got funded as of yesterday and 2 days ago that they will be working on to identify. The first one is the Weeki Wachee John Doe from 1981, the Strafford County Jane Doe of 1998, and then the Will County John Doe from 1998. I will have each one's DNA Solve link in my description box down below, as well as obviously the website for DNA Solves. This is where I get a lot of my John and Jane Doe cases that have been identified because it really helps. It shows the case, it breaks it down, it shows where you can contact for information if there is a contact, if they're identified, they show updates, all of the above. That's where I get a lot of my information from if you are new here. So that, my friends, is this week's crime roundup, recap, all the rundown, all of the above. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next one.